There's a gray duplex on Pine Street in Lowell, Massachusetts, that nobody wants to talk about anymore. The windows are boarded up now. The lawn is overgrown, and if you ask the neighbors what happened there, they'll either walk away or tell you they've already moved on. But late at night, some of them still lock their doors twice. Some of them still check their backyards before going to sleep, because what happened inside that house wasn't just a crime. It was a mother's love, twisted into something nobody saw coming. Her name was Carolyn Mercer, 48 years old, a nursing assistant at Lowell General Hospital who worked the night shift, slept in short bursts, and spent every waking moment trying to hold her life together. She had one son, one focus, one mission: keep Darren out of trouble. Darren Mercer was 22, but he'd never really grown up the way other kids did. He was moody, paranoid, explosive. He'd been expelled from 2 schools, arrested once for assault, and fired from every job he managed to get. Grocery stores, fast food chains, warehouses. None of them lasted more than a few weeks. People in the neighborhood knew something was off. They'd see him walking alone at odd hours, muttering to himself, staring too long at nothing. But Carolyn always had an explanation. He's just stressed. He's been through a lot. The world doesn't understand him. She refused psychological evaluations, refused medications, refused any suggestion that her son might need more help than she could give. To Carolyn, the problem wasn't Darren. The problem was everyone else. And for years, she managed to keep things contained, quiet, hidden, until late September when something changed. It started with the arguments. Neighbors began hearing shouting at 3 in the morning, loud crashes, the sound of furniture being thrown, walls being hit, and always, Darren's voice cutting through the night. But here's the thing that made people uneasy. He wasn't yelling at his mother. He was yelling at someone named Reed. Reed, shut up. Reed, I swear to God. Reed, stop looking at me like that. The problem? There was no Reed living in that house. It was just Carolyn and Darren. It had always been just the two of them. One neighbor, an older woman named Patricia, finally worked up the courage to ask Carolyn about it. She caught her one morning as Carolyn was leaving for her shift, exhausted and pale. "Carolyn, honey, is everything okay? We've been hearing a lot of noise at night. Is someone staying with you?" Carolyn didn't even pause. She adjusted her purse strap and gave Patricia a tired smile. "My son has been going through something. Please don't make this worse." That was it. No explanation, no reassurance, just a polite warning to stay out of it. Patricia never asked again, but the noises didn't stop. If anything, they got worse, louder, more violent. And then around the second week of October, something else started happening. The house went silent. Completely silent. No more yelling, no more crashes, no lights on at night. Carolyn still left for work, still came home in the mornings, but she moved like a ghost, hollow-eyed, jumpy, like she was holding her breath, waiting for something to explode. Neighbors started whispering, wondering. Some thought maybe Darren had finally moved out. Others thought maybe Carolyn had him committed. A few thought maybe he'd hurt her, and she was too scared to say anything. But nobody called the police. Nobody wanted to get involved. And that silence, that collective decision to look the other way, it's what allowed the nightmare to continue. Because inside that gray duplex, behind those locked doors and covered windows, Darren Mercer wasn't yelling at a hallucination. He was yelling at a real person, a 15-year-old boy who had no idea if he'd ever see daylight again. October 11th started like any other Thursday morning in Lowell. Coffee shops opened, school buses made their rounds, parents kissed their kids goodbye and headed to work. But by 9 a.m., everything changed. Reed Callahan didn't show up to homeroom at Lowell High School. His first period teacher marked him absent. His second period teacher did the same. By third period, the attendance office called his mother. "We're just checking in. Is Reed homesick today?" His mother, Jennifer Callahan, felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean? He left for school this morning. He rode his bike like he always does." The school went quiet on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Callahan, Reed never arrived." Within an hour, Lowell police had a missing persons report. Within 2 hours, they'd found Reed's bike. It was lying on its side near the entrance to the woods behind Pine Street. The same woods Darren Mercer walked through almost every night. The handlebars were bent. The front wheel was still spinning slowly when officers arrived, and Reed's backpack was gone. Search teams combed the area. Volunteers from the school showed up with flyers. Local news ran his picture on the evening broadcast. A smiling kid with braces and a Celtics hoodie. But nobody had seen him. Nobody had heard, and it was like he'd just vanished. Police started going door to door on Pine Street, asking residents if they'd noticed anything unusual, any strangers in the area, any cars that didn't belong. When they knocked on Carolyn Mercer's door, she answered quick, too like she'd been. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We're investigating the disappearance of a local teenager. Reed Callahan. He was last seen near the woods behind this street. Have you or your son noticed anything out of the ordinary in the past 24 hours? Carolyn didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway, blocking the view inside, and shook her head calmly. No, officer, I work nights, so I'm usually asleep during the day. And my son was with me all evening yesterday. We had dinner together and watched TV, didn't go out. The officer made a note, thanked her, moved on. But here's what Carolyn didn't tell. Darren hadn't spoken to her in 3 days. He'd locked himself in the basement, and she hadn't dared to open the door. She'd left food on the top step. Sometimes it would be gone by morning. Sometimes it would. She had no idea what he was doing down there. She was too terrified to find out. So when the police asked if Darren was home, she lied. When they asked if he'd been out the night Reed disappeared, she lied again. Because in Carolyn's mind, protecting Darren meant protecting him from everything, even the truth. But the investigation wasn't going away. 2 days later, Reed's older sister, Maya, was interviewed by detectives. She mentioned something that made them pause. Reed told me he got into an argument with some guy a few weeks ago on the bike path near the woods. The guy was older, maybe early 20s. He told Reed to get off his path, said it was his spot. Reed thought the guy was crazy, but he just rode away. Did Reed describe this person? Tall, thin, wore the same black jacket every time, and he was always muttering to himself. The detectives exchanged a look. They knew exactly who that sounded like. They returned to Pine Street that afternoon, this time with more pointed questions. When Carolyn answered the door, her hands were shaking. Mrs. Mercer, we need to speak with your son. He's not feeling well. We just need to ask him a few questions. It won't take long. He didn't do anything. We're not accusing him of anything, ma'am. We just need to confirm his whereabouts. On October 10th, Carolyn stepped forward, pulling the door nearly closed behind her. Her voice dropped, but it was fierce. My son needs help, not accusations. He's been struggling. He's not dangerous. He needs time. Mrs. Mercer, a boy is missing. If your son has any information, he doesn't. She closed the door. The officer stood on the porch, staring at the peeling paint and the drawn curtains. One of them radioed back to the station. We're going to need a warrant. But before they could move forward, before they could dig any deeper, something happened that forced their hand. 3 nights later at 11:47 p.m., a neighbor 2 houses down called 911. Her voice was panicked, breathless. I just heard a scream, a bad one, from the Mercer house. It cut off really fast, like someone, ma'am, stay inside. Units are on the way. When police arrived at 47 Pine Street, the front door was unlocked. The lights were off, and the house was completely still. They called out. No response. They moved through the living room, the kitchen, toward the back hallway, where the basement door stood open. And that's when they found her. Carolyn Mercer was lying at the bottom of the basement stairs, unconscious, blood pooling beneath her head. But Darren was nowhere in sight, and when officers descended those stairs, when they swept their flashlights across the concrete floor and the old furniture and the clutter of a lifetime, they noticed something that didn't belong. A wall, freshly constructed, plywood and insulation, covering what used to be an open corner of the basement, and behind it, they heard something, a faint, shallow breathing. Officer Marcus Lyle had been with Lowell PD for 11 years, and he'd seen plenty of basements, flooded ones, hoarded ones, ones that smelled like mold and old paint and forgotten lives. But he'd never seen one that made his skin crawl like this. The air down there was wrong. Too still, too thick, like something had been sealed off from the world for too long. He stepped carefully around Carolyn's body. Paramedics were already working on her, checking her pulse, stabilizing her neck, and moved toward the back corner where the new wall stood. It wasn't professional work. The plywood sheets were uneven, nailed in at awkward angles. Insulation poked out from the seams. It looked like someone had built it in a hurry, someone who didn't care about making it look right, someone who just needed to hide something. Dispatch, we've got a false wall down here, Marcus said into his radio, requesting additional units and a door ramp. Copy that. 2 minutes out. But Marcus didn't wait. He pressed his ear against the plywood and listened. At first, nothing. Then faint, shallow, labored breath. His heart kicked hard in his chest. Someone's in there. He called up the stairs. Well, we need to get this open now. 2 more officers came down with a crowbar. They wedged it into the seam between the sheets and pulled. The wood splintered. Nails shrieked. And with one final heave, the plywood came loose and clattered to the floor. The smell hit them first. Sweat, urine, fear. Marcus shined his flashlight into the space, and his breath caught. It was a room, barely. No bigger than a closet. No windows. No ventilation. Just a concrete floor, 4 makeshift walls, and a single bare bulb hanging from a wire that wasn't even connected. And huddled in the corner, chained to a bolt in the floor, was Reed Callahan. He was alive, bare. His clothes were filthy. His face was gaunt, hollow. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He didn't move when the light hit him, didn't speak, didn't even seem to register that someone was there. He just stared straight ahead, eyes glassy and distant, like he'd gone somewhere far away and didn't know how to come back. Jesus Christ, one of the officers whispered. Marcus dropped to his knees in front of the boy. Reed, can you hear me? You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here. No response. Marcus reached for the chain. It was padlocked to a metal collar around Reed's ankle, the kind you'd use for a dog. The skin underneath was raw, infected. Reed had tried to pull free, tried to escape, and failed. Bolt cutters, Marcus barked. Now, while they worked to free him, Marcus scanned the rest of the room. There were blankets in one corner, stained and bunched up like Reed had tried to make some kind of bed. Empty food trays stacked near the wall. Plastic containers, the kind you'd use for leftovers. A gallon jug of water, nearly empty. And in the far corner, a backpack. Marcus reached for it, unzipped it carefully. Inside, textbooks, a homework folder, a school ID card with Reed's smiling face on it. This wasn't random. This wasn't a stranger snatching a kid off the street. Darren Mercer had planned this, built this, kept Reed alive down here for over a week. And Carolyn had known. The bolt cutters snapped through the chain, and Reed's leg dropped to the floor. He still didn't react, didn't cry, didn't try to run. He just sat there, staring at nothing. Paramedics rushed down with a stretcher. They wrapped him in blankets, checked his vitals, started an IV. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, leaned close to Reed's face. Sweetie, you're going to be okay. We're taking you to the hospital. Your mom's waiting for you. For the first time, Reed blinked. His lips moved. Barely a whisper. She brought me food. The paramedic frowned, glanced at Marcus. Who brought you food, honey? Reed's eyes drifted toward the stairs, toward where Carolyn's unconscious body had been just minutes before. The realization settled over the basement like a weight. Carolyn hadn't just known. She'd been complicit. She'd been feeding him, keeping him alive, keeping him quiet. And all the while she'd been lying to police, lying to neighbors, lying to everyone. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, stepping into the cold October night, where paramedics were loading Carolyn into an ambulance. Is she stable? He asked. Concussion, possible skull fracture. She's unconscious but breathing. We're taking her to Lowell General. Post a guard on her room. The second she wakes up, I want to know. The paramedic nodded and the ambulance pulled away, sirens cutting through the quiet street. Marcus stood there, staring at the duplex. Neighbors had gathered on their porches now, phones out, filming, whispering. News vans were already rolling up. This was going to be everywhere by morning. But there was still one question nobody could answer. Where the hell was Darren Mercer? Reed Callahan was admitted to Lowell General Hospital just after midnight, dehydrated, malnourished, his body covered in bruises, some fresh, some days old. The doctors worked quickly. IV fluids, antibiotics, a full exam to document every injury. But it was the psychological damage that worried them most. Reed wouldn't speak, wouldn't make eye contact. When nurses tried to touch him, he flinched. When they asked him questions, he just stared at the wall. His mother, Jennifer, sat beside his bed, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face. But Reed didn't squeeze back, didn't acknowledge her. It was like he was still in that room, still chained to the floor, still waiting for someone to open the door. A trauma counselor was brought in. Police waited outside, ready to take a statement the moment Reed was able to give one. But hour after hour passed, and he said nothing, until finally, in the early morning light, he whispered something so quiet his mother almost missed it. She never looked at me. Jennifer leaned closer. Who, baby? Who never looked at you? Reed's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. The woman. She brought the food, but she never looked at me like I wasn't even there. Jennifer's blood went cold. Back at Pine Street, the forensic team was tearing the basement apart. They photographed everything. The chain, the food trays, the makeshift walls. They dusted for prints, collected DNA, bagged evidence, and what they found painted a horrifying picture. The food trays were covered in Carolyn's fingerprints. So was the padlock. So was the water jug. She hadn't just known Reed was down there. She'd been the one taking care of him. The construction of the room itself was crude but deliberate. Someone had measured the space, cut the plywood to fit, installed the bolt in the floor with concrete anchors. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. But by who? Darren? Carolyn? Both of them? Detective Marcus Lyle stood in the center of the basement, trying to piece it together. He'd been a cop long enough to know that family dynamics could twist people into unrecognizable shapes. But this was something else entirely. His phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. She's awake. Carolyn Mercer lay in a hospital bed, her head wrapped in bandages, her wrists cuffed to the side rails. 2 officers stood guard outside her door. Marcus entered slowly, pulling a chair close to her bed. She turned her head to look at him, and for a moment, he saw something almost like relief in her eyes, like she'd been waiting for this, like she was tired of carrying the weight alone. "Mrs. Mercer," Marcus said quietly, "we found Reed Callahan in your basement. He's alive. He's safe, but we need to know what happened." Carolyn closed her eyes. Her voice came out hoarse, broken. "I tried to stop him." "Stop who?" "Darren," she nodded. "When did you know Reed was down there?" A long pause, then barely audible. "From the beginning." Marcus felt his stomach turn. "You knew from the beginning, and you didn't call the police?" "I couldn't." Her voice cracked. "If I called, they'd take Darren away. They'd lock him up. He's my son. He's all I have. So you let a 15-year-old boy suffer in your basement because you didn't want your son to face consequences?" Carolyn's eyes opened, wet with tears. "You don't understand. Darren didn't mean to hurt anyone. He gets confused. He thought Reed was following him, watching him. He thought Reed was dangerous, so he kidnapped him. He was scared." Marcus leaned forward, his voice hard. "Reed was scared, Mrs. Mercer. Reed was the one chained to a floor. Reed was the one who didn't know if he'd ever see his family again. And you fed him like a pet and pretended everything was fine." Carolyn turned her face away. "I didn't know what else to do. You could have called the police. You could have saved that boy." "I tried to protect him." "You tried to protect your son," Marcus corrected. "And in doing that, you became part of the crime." Silence filled the room. Finally, Marcus stood. "Where's Darren now?" "I don't know." "Mrs. Mercer, I don't know," she snapped, her voice rising. "He pushed me down the stairs and ran. I heard the back door slam. That's the last I saw of him." Marcus studied her face. She was telling the truth, or at least she believed she was. "Did he say anything before he ran? Anything about where he might go?" Carolyn's expression crumbled. He said I ruined everything, that I should have just let him finish it." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Finish what?" But Carolyn just closed her eyes and turned away, repeating the same phrase she'd say for years to come. "I tried to protect him, but I couldn't protect anyone else." Outside the hospital, the sun was rising over Lowell. News crews had set up camp outside the duplex. Reed's face was on every screen, every front page. The story was spreading fast. "Local teen found alive after 9 days in captivity. Mother of suspect allegedly involved." Marcus stood in the parking lot, staring at his phone. The Amber Alert for Darren Mercer had been upgraded to a manhunt. His photo was everywhere. Armed and dangerous. "Do not approach." But Marcus had a sinking feeling. Darren Mercer wasn't coming back. He was already gone. Disappeared into the woods, into the cracks, into the kind of darkness that doesn't leave a trail. And somewhere out there, he was still free. By noon on October 15th, every cop in Massachusetts was looking for Darren Mercer. His photo was plastered across every news station. Social media was flooded with shares. The FBI had been notified, and Lowell police had mobilized the biggest search operation the town had seen in decades. K-9 units were brought in from 3 neighboring counties. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras circled overhead. Ground teams combed through the woods behind Pine Street, moving in careful grids, calling out coordinates, checking every abandoned shed and drainage tunnel they could find. But the woods were dense. Old growth trees, thick underbrush, miles of trails that twisted and overlapped and led nowhere. It was the kind of place where you could disappear if you knew what you were doing. Darren knew those woods better than anyone. The dogs picked up his scent near the tree line behind the duplex. They followed it for almost 2 miles, weaving through brambles and over a creek until they reached an old service road that hadn't been used in years. And then the trail went cold. No footprints, no clothing fibers, no trace. It was like he just evaporated. Marcus stood at the edge of the road, watching the handlers try to reacquire the scent. They moved in circles, the dogs sniffing frantically, but nothing. One of the handlers shook his head. He either got into a vehicle, or he knew how to cover his tracks. Either way, we lost him. Marcus cursed under his breath. He pulled out his phone and called back to the station. Anything on traffic cams? Gas stations? ATMs? Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. What about family? Friends? Anyone he might reach out to? Carolyn was it. No father in the picture, no siblings, no close friends that we can find. The guy was a ghost even before he ran. Marcus hung up and stared into the trees. Somewhere out there, Darren Mercer was hiding, waiting, planning his next, or maybe he was already gone. Maybe he'd hitched a ride out of state, changed his appearance, disappeared into a city where nobody knew his face. But Marcus didn't think so. There was something about this case that felt unfinished, like Darren wasn't done yet. Back in Lowell, the community was falling apart. Parents were keeping their kids home from school. People were installing new locks, security cameras, motion sensor lights. The neighborhood around Pine Street had become a fortress. Vigils were being held for Reed, candles, flowers, stuffed animals piled up outside Lowell High School. Students made posters. Teachers gave speeches about resilience and healing. But beneath all of it was fear, because Darren Mercer was still out there and nobody knew what he was capable of. The Callahan family released a brief statement through their lawyer. They thanked the police, thanked the community, asked for privacy while Reed recovered, but they didn't do interviews, didn't appear on camera. And when reporters camped outside their house, they closed the curtains and didn't come out because Reed still wasn't talking. The doctor said it could take weeks, months, maybe years. Trauma like this didn't just go away. It burrowed deep, changed the way your brain worked, made you question whether the world was even safe anymore. Reed had spent 9 days in a room smaller than a closet, chained like an animal, listening to footsteps above his head and wondering if today was the day he'd die. And the person who kept him alive, the person who slid food trays under the door and made sure he had water, she was the same person who lied to the police when they came looking for him. How do you process that? How do you make sense of a woman who kept you breathing but wouldn't set you free? Reed's therapist said he kept repeating the same thing in their sessions. She never looked at me, as if Carolyn had convinced herself that by not making eye contact, by not acknowledging Reed as a real person, she wasn't really part of what was happening. As if feeding him made her a caretaker instead of a captor. As if love for her son erased everything else. 3 days into the manhunt, a tip came in. A gas station attendant in Nashua, New Hampshire, about 30 miles north of Lowell, reported seeing someone matching Darren's description. Tall, thin, black jacket, nervous, paid cash for a bottle of water and a bag of chips, then disappeared into the woods across the highway. State police responded within minutes, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of him. More tips followed. A homeless shelter in Worcester, a rest stop on Route 3, a campsite near the Vermont border. But every time police arrived, Darren was already gone. It became clear he wasn't running blind. He was moving deliberately, staying off main roads, avoiding cameras, using cash, sleeping outdoors. He'd planned for this. Or maybe he'd always known it would end this way. Marcus reviewed Darren's history again, looking for anything they'd missed. The school expulsions were for fighting. One time, he'd attacked a classmate who he claimed was staring at him. The arrest was for threatening a convenience store clerk who'd asked him to leave. Every incident followed the same pattern. Darren felt watched, felt threatened, and he lashed out. The psychiatrist who'd evaluated him after the arrest had noted possible paranoid ideation and recommended long-term treatment. Carolyn had refused. Now a 15-year-old boy was traumatized for life. Carolyn was facing felony charges, and Darren was somewhere out there, convinced the world was hunting him, which Marcus realized grim it now was. On October 21st, 10 days after Reed disappeared, 6 days after he was found, the search was officially scaled back. The helicopters were grounded. The K-9 units were sent home. The FBI moved on to other cases. Darren Mercer's case was reclassified as a cold case manhunt. His photo would stay in the system. His name would stay on watch lists, but active. Pursuit was over. There just weren't enough resources to keep searching forever. Marcus stood in the conference room, staring at the evidence board covered in photos and timelines and unanswered questions. Somewhere, Darren Mercer was still alive, still free, still dangerous. And Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that one day, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but one day, Darren would come back, because people like him always did. 18 months have passed since that October night. The gray duplex on Pine Street still stands, but it's empty now, condemned. The windows are boarded up with plywood marked with red X's. The yard is a tangle of dead weeds and trash that blows in from the street. The city tried to auction it off twice. Both times, there were no bids. Nobody wants to live in the house where a boy was kept in chains. The neighbors who used to live on either side have moved away. The family across the street put up a for sale sign 3 months after the case broke, and sold at a loss just to get out. The ones who stayed don't talk about it, not to reporters, not to each other, not even to their own families. But late at night, when the streetlights flicker and the wind moves through the trees, some of them still hear things. Footsteps in the backyard, branches snapping in the woods, the sound of someone moving just beyond the fence line. One neighbor, Patricia, The woman who'd asked Carolyn if everything was okay installed 3 security cameras after the case closed. She checks the footage every morning. Most days it's nothing. Raccoons, stray cats, shadows. But twice in the past year, her cameras caught movement near the tree line behind the Mercer property. A shape too tall to be an animal, too quick to get a clear look. She reported it to police both times. Both times they searched the area and found nothing. Probably just kids, one officer told her. Teenagers messing around, but Patricia doesn't think so. She's lived on Pine Street for 23 years, and she knows what teenagers look like. This was something else. Reed Callahan doesn't live in Lowell anymore. His family moved 6 weeks after he was released from the hospital. They didn't tell anyone where they were going, didn't leave forwarding addresses, just packed up in the middle of the night and vanished. Reed never went back to Lowell High School, never spoke to his old friends, never gave an interview or made a public statement. The last official record of his voice is from a police interview conducted 3 months after his rescue. Even then, his answers were short, clipped, like each word cost him something. Did Darren ever tell you why he took you? No. Did he hurt you? Sometimes. What did Carolyn say to you when she brought food? Nothing. She never said anything. Did she ever try to help you escape? A long pause. Then, no. The interview was sealed. Reed was a minor. The details of what happened in that basement, what Darren did, what Carolyn allowed, were never made public. But the therapist who worked with Reed in those early months said something in a private case review that stayed with Marcus. He doesn't hate her. That's the part he can't make sense of. He knows what she did was wrong. He knows she could have saved him. But when he talks about her, there's no anger, just confusion. Like he's trying to understand how someone could care enough to keep him alive, but not enough to set him free. That's the part that haunts people. Not the violence, not the kidnapping, but the quiet cruelty of a woman who chose her son over a child's freedom. Carolyn Mercer never stood trial. After months of psychiatric evaluations, she was deemed mentally unfit to assist in her own defense. The terms thrown around were delusional attachment, pathological enabling, and dissociative moral reasoning. In plain English, she loved her son so much that she stopped seeing reality clearly. She's been committed to a long-term psychiatric care facility in central Massachusetts. High security, no visitors except her court-appointed advocate. Journalists have tried to interview her. Podcasters, documentarians, even a few true crime YouTubers. All requests have been denied. But one reporter managed to get a statement from a staff member who works on her floor. The staff member, who asked to remain anonymous, said Carolyn spends most of her days staring out the window. She doesn't read, doesn't watch TV, doesn't interact with other patients. But every few days, she'll turn to whoever's nearby and say the same thing. I tried to protect him, but I couldn't protect anyone else. It's not clear if she even understands what she's saying anymore, or if it's just something her brain loops back to, like a broken record. Either way, she'll likely spend the rest of her life in that facility. And Darren Mercer is still missing. The case remains open. His photo is still in the FBI database, still on the Massachusetts State Police website, still pinned to the bulletin board in the Lowell PD Cold Case Unit. There have been sightings over the years. A man matching his description spotted at a bus station in Albany. A hitchhiker in rural Vermont who gave a fake name but had the same build. Same nervous energy. Each time police follow up. Each time the trail goes cold. Some investigators think he's dead, that he got lost in the woods that first night and succumbed to exposure or injury, that his body is out there somewhere, hidden under leaves and snow, waiting to be found by a hiker or a hunting dog. Others think he's alive, that he's changed his appearance, that he's living off the grid, moving from town to town, sleeping in shelters or under bridges, staying invisible. And a few, Marcus included, think he's still close, still watching, still waiting, because people like Darren don't just disappear. They orbit, they circle back, and one day when the world stops looking, when the case fades from memory and the neighbors let their guard down, that's when they come home. If you drive down Pine Street today, you'll pass the duplex without even noticing it. Just another rundown house in a working-class neighborhood. Just another tragedy that people would rather forget. But if you stop, if you get out of your car and stand in front of that boarded-up door and really listen, you might hear it. The faint creak of footsteps on old wood, the rustle of movement in the trees, the feeling that someone is standing just out of sight, watching you, the way Darren once watched Reed. Patricia heard it again last week. She was taking out the trash just after midnight when she felt it, that prickle on the back of her neck, that animal instinct that tells you you're not alone. She turned toward the duplex and for just a second she swore she saw a figure standing in the upstairs window. Tall, thin, motionless. By the time she grabbed her phone to call 911, it was gone. The police came. They checked the house. All the doors were still locked. All the boards were still nailed in place. Nothing had been disturbed. But Patricia knows what she saw, and so do the others who refuse to talk about it. Because deep down, everyone on Pine Street knows the same terrible truth. Darren Mercer is still out there, and one day he's coming back.